What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we are coming at you each and every week with a fresh weekend to debrief in an effort to send biblical truth. And what better way to do that by the power of conversation? I'm Rose Locke, and I am your hostess for today, which is an unusual place for me. And I have an unusual guest with me.
This is crazy. It's like,
it really is.
Yeah. Who's took over the podcast?
Yeah, it feels like the worship ministry does a dive into the podcast.
Over. Everyone goes on vacation and they leave us in charge.
Well, you have to introduce yourself now since we talked.
Mike Lukens.
Yes, Mike Lukens is our pastor of worship and creative arts, and he's here with me today.
First time on the Sermon Spotlight podcast.
Is it really?
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes.
Have you been on all of the other ones?
I don't think I've been on the Global Church podcast.
I've hosted a couple of those, so nice. It's a nice one too. So we are going to talk about the sermon from last Sunday, which is, the reference was Mark 6, 31 through 44, and it's a story, as Mark Carey reminded us, that we've heard since we were kids, right? It's the story of the feeding of the 5,000. So I just have a question for Mike right off the top, and that is, has he ever been hangry?
That's a great question, and I came prepared for that answer.
Wow.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Look at that.
If you get hangry, Snickers has a solution for you with the hangry bar.
Yeah, so people who are listening only, Mike just handed me a Snickers bar that says hangry on it, which is awesome.
Yeah, that was the old, the big tough guy who turns into Betty White after he gets his hangriness taken care of.
Oh, that's really funny.
I don't usually get hangry. I do, because I have diabetes, get low blood sugars, which causes me to, as they say, the term is eat the fridge. So you get so in a place where you need food that you just go into the kitchen and eat whatever is in sight, and then you regret it later. So, yes.
Well, it's funny
that counts as hangry.
It's funny to me that hangry just became a word and then it just got in the dictionary, because I just spent a week with my grandchildren, and I'll just say that children get hangry.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So like a baby who needs to eat screams at you when they're hungry, or a 3-year-old who hasn't had lunch is a little whiny on your leg. So I can picture 5,000 people with all these kids, and some little kids like pulling on their mom's leg and getting a little fussy about it. Yeah. So I just thought that was kind of a fun place to start the sermon. And my daughter will tell you she gets pretty hangry. So Mike, did anything stand out to you particularly in this sermon? Like, again, it's a story we've known since we were kids.
Right,
so was there anything new for you here in what Mark taught?
Well, the whole, the way that the teaching happens here at Fellowship Bible Church is expository. So the whole, that story typically is pulled out of the context of the Gospel of Mark, or whatever gospel it's recorded in, and is taught in isolation. So seeing that story in the context of what the disciples had just experienced, and then even, verse 31, when it talks about they didn't even have time to eat, typically we would pick it up for verse 33, and it would go right into, he's teaching the crowds, and they're there for a long time, and there's no food, and then the miracle happens. But this context of where we are in the Gospel of Mark, and what the disciples had just experienced, and their confidence in themselves as they went out to minister. And, you could just picture them coming back and just being kind of puffed up with the excitement of what took place, but their confidence in themselves. And then Jesus uses this opportunity to teach them, hey, this is not about you and what you can do. And you need to realize that you can't do it, but I can.
Yeah, probably a pretty important lesson for them actually at the time, because I can think of circumstances in my own life where I feel like I've been really successful at something. Like I had a career for a long time as a professional piano player, right? And I might play a concert and it might go really well. And then I walk out feeling like, oh, I could do that. I could play that really hard music. I can do this, right? And then the next challenging opportunity presents itself and I just fall flat on my face, right? Partly because I don't work as hard maybe as I should have before because of that. But in this case, So you're all puffed up. You know you can do all these great things, or you think that you yourself did all these great things, and now you have to be reminded that it's not you, but rather that it's Christ that lives in you. So Mark couldn't be here today, but I was really hoping he would, because I wanted to ask you and Mark a question, because Mike has been on staff here almost as long as Mark Carey, right? Mm-hmm. So shortly after Mark came, and I'm sure, Mike, that you could give us examples of times in the ministry here at Fellowship Bible Church where you said, I can't. Like, we can't do that. That's too hard. Or we can't accomplish that. But then you saw God do it anyway. So I just wondered if you had some practical examples of this idea when we look at, when we get to this point where we say, I can't, where we're hitting this brick wall, where we're in this impossible situation. I had a feeling you guys had some ministry stories that you could share.
Yeah, I mean, what pops out in my mind is the whole area of finances, and the elders constantly trust in the Lord to provide what is needed for ministry. And I remember when we moved in, or the need was there to build this building that we're currently in now. It was about 2001 was when the building was built, and we moved in shortly after that. Just the price tag on what was needed for ministry space, and it was $7 million plus, and it was like, that was way beyond what we had ever taken on or endeavored. And the elders were like, no, we're gonna trust the Lord that we're gonna do this, and we're gonna build what we need for not just to get by, but for the future. And here we are 20 some years later, and we need to do some things with space, but God has provided. And to think of the diligence of paying off that mortgage, and 6 or 7 years later, I think it was, that $7 million was paid off. And just to see, that's not something that we can do, and we can we can raise that money. And even in the process of we brought in some consultants to help us to think about that process, and they gave some recommendations that were good, but some that were like, you need to do this strategy in order to get money to come in from the congregation. And the elders were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to trust the Lord and go to our leadership and ask them to give sacrificially first, and then allow the congregation to follow. So, things like that. There's certainly tons of times that, we're in the situation where there just seems like there's too much to do and not enough time to do it, or, the impossible situations, whether it's, helping someone through, a death of a loved one, or ministry opportunities that just seem for us impossible. And God proves himself faithful to bring us through that, and we can trust him for that.
Yeah, I think about COVID a little bit, and I remember the day that John Van Drunen came to me, and I was working on the stage in the worship center, and John Van Drunen said, what would we do if they made us shut the church? And I thought he was speaking an incredible hyperbole, and I kind of shrugged my shoulders at him, and I said, well, I guess we'll record a video of Mike in his kitchen playing guitar. That was my response, right? And I just watched God just lay into us and into your leadership and Mark Carey's leadership and the elders' leadership a way to continue to worship as a unified body during a time that was very challenging, as they told us, as the government said we could no longer meet in this building, and for everyone's safety and to be submissive, we made the decision to not meet together for some time. And I think I saw that as a situation that I would have deemed absolutely impossible. Yeah. I saw God do things that I could never have imagined he would do. So
I think another one specifically with worship ministry is, whenever we have a key person that's part of our team, move away or maybe leave the church for some reason, it's like, oh, how are we ever going to replace them? And then it just seems like shortly after that, God brings someone to take their place and to step in and to serve. And that's God's principle of providing for the body what the body needs in the different gifts and abilities and things like that. So it's neat to watch God in that. So I've gotten to the place where it's like, if someone says, I'm going to be moving, or I'm going to be, retiring from singing, it's like, I don't get as stressed about it because I know God's got something, next for us. So
yeah, it's kind of fun to watch.
Yeah.
Not that we want anyone to leave our teams, right?
Yeah.
So I think so. The one area that Mark hit on was this idea that we can become overly prideful and overly self-confident, and be challenged with are we God dependent or self dependent, right? Which I think that's incredibly countercultural. Like I feel like from the time we have children, we are telling our children, or from the time we ourselves were children, we're being told like, go to school, get a good job, figure out how you're going to pay your bills, make sure you can take care of yourself. So this idea that we are supposed to be God dependent and not God sufficient should be sufficient for us, and we shouldn't be self-sufficient, I feel like is very countercultural in the United States. And I don't know about other cultures, but I'm wondering if you have like some personal examples of times in your own personal life, not directly ministry focused, where you feel like you have been God sufficient instead of self-sufficient. And it's a really personal question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but...
Yeah, I mean, certainly, excuse me, the, my extended family has, over the years, and nothing that no one else has faced, and nothing greater than anybody else has faced, but faced some, difficult circumstances with losing people in our family. It started with my parents, but then a niece and a nephew as adults, and just recently a 7-month-old yet to be born baby of my nephew. And just thinking, through that, and Lori, my wife's cancer journey, and my diabetes, and all those things, I think God uses to get us off of our dependence upon ourselves, because we're at that place where I can't do this. I don't know how we're going to get through this, but here's an opportunity to trust God and watch Him do that. And it reminded me, I don't know if we have time to go here, but it reminded me of, this is the book by Strombeck, J.F. Strombeck, Disciplined by Grace. The discipleship ministry is really encouraging people, along with the discipleship modules, to read through this. And this one is the chapter, The Trial of Faith. And I think this just really summarizes it, and it was very appropriate for this message. But he says, God's purpose then in the lives of His children while here on earth is to create, develop, strengthen, and refine that complete dependence upon Him, which must be found in those who, throughout all eternity, and to be the very closest to Him and share His glory. They who are to take a place nearer to Him than even that held by Lucifer before he declared his independence of God. So the chapter just talks about how God uses trials and suffering to continue to push us to that place of dependence upon God. And that's why I love our mission statement so much, that to prepare and deploy dependent disciples of Jesus Christ. God's desire isn't that we get to the place where we can perform independently of Him and live this righteous, holy life independently of Him, and He just doesn't need to put too much effort into us, but He wants us to be in this place of complete dependence upon Him. And each of those things, whether it's trials, suffering, difficult circumstances, push us to that dependence upon Him. And a legalistic perspective says, I messed up, I failed, I need to try harder so that I get it right next time. A grace perspective says, I failed, I messed up, I need to lean in even more to God and be dependent upon Him for what I need to do what God wants for me so I can thrive in this life.
It's funny. Yeah. I had breakfast with a friend on Friday, and I was sharing with this friend just some struggles that I'd been having, and she says almost that exact same thing to me. She says, I said, man, I just keep messing up. I just keep blowing it like over and over and over and over again in this one area of my life. And she says to me, so you go to God and you say to God, I messed up again. I did it again. And He wraps His arms around you and He loves you, And so that is very countercultural because our culture would say, like at the end of his sermon, Mark said, he used several examples and I didn't write them all down, but he said things like, you don't need a new job. You don't need, you don't need really a new spouse. You don't need a new house. You don't need more of what this world has to offer. But you need to learn how to depend on God in those really hard circumstances. Yeah. And then I want to, if we could just shift for a second to kind of his second application. And his second application, I took a picture of the screen because I think the picture, what Mark said was, when God's heart becomes our heart, we hear the cry of others. When God's heart becomes our heart, we see the impossible happen. And when God's heart becomes our heart, our wilderness turns into abundance. And one of the things he challenged us with is how many opportunities have passed by us because we're so self-focused. And that speaks to our first application. When we're worried about what we can do, then how many opportunities are we missing because we're not thinking about loving and caring for other people? Right. So I say all of that just to say, do you have some examples maybe from your own life or from your ministry where the opportunity to love people either passed you by or you regret not following through with that opportunity or an example of a need that came across your path by surprise you were able to fulfill? I know it's a lot. I know. I put you on the spot by asking you that question, but
I'm totally guilty of having needs dropped in front of me and just kind of like, oh, I don't want to do that. I, don't have time for that.
It's too
I don't
hard.
Want to add one more thing to my plate.
Yeah. To me, sometimes I'm like, that's too hard. That's really overwhelming. That's a really big need. Let's find someone else who can help with that need.
Yeah. So I'm very probably task oriented, and I saw this kind of looking back years and years ago, and I was doing youth ministry. I would find myself just almost busying myself with setting up things and getting things ready for the youth ministry meeting, that even when kids were there, it was like, oh, I got to do this and do that and make sure this is right. And, the students are right in front of me, and it's like, here's opportunities to have conversations and pour into their lives. And yet want to just make sure everything's done just right and set up just right. And I think it was, and even like, I don't know how to pour into their lives like I should. So I'm going to take that excuse away because I had to do this. And, I'd still find myself doing that. And it's easy to, in between services or whatever, sit back in the choir room and have a cup of coffee with the team, as opposed to going out and talking to people in the foyer.
Right.
That's where real ministry takes place. Not that those relationships aren't important, but there's time for those at other times.
Yeah, so. I think, and I was going to use like a similar example. I could tell you a story years ago. This is kind of a funny story. Years ago, it was like a quiet time in my life. So that means that it was probably summertime. and I wasn't doing some of the other extra things that I can tend to pile on my plate. And so I remember asking God for the opportunity to love someone. I remember praying the prayer, God, I would really like to love someone. So the way I have found to love people and get to know people and find their needs is I will kind of leave my perch, which is the tech booth on Sunday morning, and I'll find time to walk around and get to and look around to see people I don't know or see people who are sitting by themselves. So I met these people, and it was their first Sunday at FBC. And the story was that the husband was doing some training out here on the East Coast. They were actually from California. The husband was doing some training on the East Coast, and they were traveling as a family. So the wife was kind of staying in this hotel room with her 3 kids all day with nothing to do, and the husband was at this training all day. And so I met them. They actually ended up staying that day. We were still doing all this chair setup. They actually stayed that day and helped me do some chair setup. And of course, my husband and I invited them out for dinner. They came to our home. We got to know them better. And while they were here in Winchester, they had an extreme life crisis happen. And so she called me from the hotel room one day, and one of their children desperately needed to go to the emergency room. And so I got in my car, I went to the hotel, I helped transport them to the emergency room, and then I took their 2 younger children. So as the mother helped the older child who was in crisis, I took the 2 younger children with me. Actually, some friends from church were having a party, like a lunch party that day. I took these 2 children of this family that I barely knew to this lunch party. And it was a great blessing to that family. It was a great blessing to me to be able to help them. I've never seen them again. I think I got a Christmas card from them the first year. I've never heard from them again, but I feel like it was an opportunity to love people because I opened myself up to get to know somebody new, to find their need. And I had also asked God for that opportunity. And so when the opportunity came, I was kind of stuck, right? Even though it was a big one, that's a big ask, right? But I had asked God specifically for the opportunity to love somebody. Yeah. So I think that that's an important part of it.
I think what a lot of this comes down to, and you know, I love the tie-in that Mark had with Psalm 23, and I finally, God finally showed me. You know, we put together this bumper for this series, Following Jesus, and we had a couple different scenes that were portrayed as Jesus, and one that God put in front of me was the shepherd carrying the sheep, and I was like, it doesn't say that in the Gospel of Mark. It's not, you know, it's John. I'm the good shepherd, but God just had us include that. And now, you know, seeing this, you know, Jesus sees the crowds, has compassion on them because they're like sheep without a shepherd, and he has them sit down in the green grass, green pasture, and then this link to Psalm 23, you know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. And I think that when we understand that about Jesus, when we're following him and we trust him as our good shepherd and he provides what we need, that really frees us up to have eyes to minister to others. But so often we are trying to get our own needs met and trying to get that met through people or circumstances or our own accomplishments. And when we're so busy with our eyes fixed on getting our own needs met, when God's already provided our needs, then we don't have eyes to see the needs of others and how he wants to use us in that.
Yeah, really, really good stuff. So, any other last thoughts about the weekend or other reflections you had on the sermon?
We talked about this morning in our planning meeting for the worship team. I'm curious to see how, I'm not allowed to say this, but how Mark Carey is going to deal with the feeding of the 4,000, because we were looking at it today and it was like, this is so similar to this other passage. Should we just sing the same songs again and just kind of repeat? Because obviously the disciples didn't get the point. Even in the next story of Jesus walking on the water, they still didn't get it. And obviously he had to feed another multitude later on in chapter 8 because they don't get it still, and they're still in the same place. We can identify with the disciples and maybe give ourselves some grace of like when we're slow to learn, and God is patient with us. So.
Yeah, I just glanced at my notes, and there was one other thing that Mark Carey said that I think like it made my jaw drop, and it made me like, oh wow, that felt really countercultural. And that is, he said that the Christian life is about when things go badly. And I think what he was saying is that when life is hard and times are tough, that's when kind of the rubber meets the road on our faith, right? Are we going to trust in the Good Shepherd? Are we going to know that God is working in and through us for his glory and our good? Yeah. Or are we going to try to remain self-sufficient and stand on our own two legs? Yeah. So I thought the sermon was really encouraging and eye-opening for...
I heard a great quote last week. Charles Spurgeon, actually. And I'd never know that he said this, but apparently the quote goes, "Everything in life is hard except eating pancakes." And apparently Charles Spurgeon said that. So
that's very interesting.
We don't be surprised if this trouble brings you, or if this life brings us troubles. But God has overcome the world, and it's through walking with Him and following Him. And I've so appreciated this sermon series that keeps pushing us back to that. And even Caleb and Hannah's testimony of the miscarriages, just an impossible situation where all they had was to look unto Jesus. That was their only hope. And
yeah, truly, because I've known people, I was going to refer to that as well. I've known people in that circumstances, and now they're looking to all the doctors, and they're looking to their own, like, my diet, and, they're looking at all these things that they themselves can do, but they're not necessarily relying on the Lord and walking with Him. So that was also a great example of this whole idea. So I guess we all just keep following Jesus, right? Yep. That's all we can do. So I just wanted to thank everybody. Thanks to Mike, because this was kind of impromptu. We didn't know Mark wasn't going to be here, but as always, a great conversation. I hope that everybody listening kind of realizes what a great opportunity it is just to sit and listen to you and your wisdom, and how valuable that is to us, to our team, and to our body. So thank you for everything that you do. And for all our listeners and viewers, remember that we really like to hear from you. You can send over your thoughts and your questions or your requests, and we really do want to hear those. We really want to make this as applicable and as helpful to everyone as we can. You can send those things to fbcva.org/podcasts, and you can write notes and comments there. Also, check out our other 2 Fellowship Bible Church podcasts where you can listen to Mike on one of them, right? You said you'd never been on the Global Church one.
Not yet.
The Fellowship Family and the Global Church podcast. And the fact of the matter is, everybody, that sermons are not meant to take an hour, but to transform our lives. And until next week, much love and God bless.